We are living through something that no other generation has ever experienced. We are living through the collapse of one system and the birth of another. AI is accelerating faster than anyone has ever expected, and the economy feels unstable. The job market feels unstable. Our future feels terrifying, but also full of possibility and opportunity. And somewhere in the middle, I think Gen Z is just trying to stay human and make sense of it all. So today, to highlight this, I am joined by someone who has been warning about and preparing for this transition for over a decade. I'm joined by Jeff Booth, the author of The Price of Tomorrow, and he is one of the clearest thinkers in deflation, exponential technology, Bitcoin, and AI. So I really do think he has a lot to say that would be so helpful for Gen Z and a lot of my audience to hear. So I was so excited to bring him on and have this conversation, which is not going to be about price predictions, hype, or even telling Gen Z to buy Bitcoin. Honestly, I want to keep this conversation about something bigger. I want to keep it about how we stay grounded and human when the world that we grew up in is collapsing and something entirely new is emerging for our generation. So, Mr. Booth, thank you so much for being here and coming on. I really appreciate you making the time to do this.
Love to be here, and I love that you're doing this. Congrats.
Thank you. So let's just get right into it. I mean, you have spent years talking about how the system that we live in is not just broken with inflation, but it was always going to break, that it was built like this by design. So, I really do want to start there. I want to start by asking you, what is this old world that the generations before us grew up in, and what is happening to it now?
Yeah, and some of what I'll say here will challenge, if it's the first time any of your audience has heard of it, you've probably listened to a bunch of this stuff, and so it's starting to resonate. The first time you hear it, even though you know it's true, it's hard to, your brain wants to push back because you've lived in a different system. So I always start with, actually, maybe I'm going to back up from here instead of starting where I was going to. I'm going to back up and say, in my book, I described what would happen. People think AI is moving faster today. It's moving at the exact same speed it's been moving for 70 years, but that speed is exponential. And one of the things I wrote in my book is I wrote that I used an analogy to be able to show what was happening, and that's a piece of paper folding. And if you fold a piece of paper on itself once, and then fold it twice, and then fold it 3 times, the folds are really thin, and people should do this, right? Just to feel what it means. And you can only fold it 7 times until you can't fold it anymore. But then if you asked, if I could continue folding it 50 times, how thick would that piece of paper be? I've asked that question to hundreds of thousands of people all over the world, and you always get about the same answer, about that thick. And what does that say? And by the way, the piece of paper, if you could continue folding it 50 times, would reach from here to the sun, from the earth to the sun. And what you just did, what your mind just did, right? You can't project exponential patterns, but information and technology is moving at that same rate. It's moving on an exponential pattern. It's doubling and doubling again every 18 months, even faster now with AI. And so the same thing that happens in the 50s when people predicted AI was going to change everything in the 50s, and then it was nothing, was the first fold, and the second fold, and the third fold. And people overestimate the impact early on. And then later on, because the folds are thicker, the steps are way bigger, they massively underestimate how fast things are moving. So we're in a time where we're really bad at predicting exponential patterns. We're terrible at it. I don't say that I'm better at it. I say we all as humans don't really understand exponential patterns. They break our brains. And we're living in it. And these things are coming faster and faster and faster, right? And they're hitting. So AI, robotics, the entire suite of everything we're talking about today, not that it won't have mistakes on the way there, but today is the slowest it's ever going to move by so much you can't believe it, right? So today is the slowest it's ever going to move. So now you combine that with something else I wrote about in my book. The natural state of the free market is deflation, right? We compete. So there's something there before, and then we compete. Entrepreneurs compete, provide more value to society. And then we as users only use the things that give us more value. The reason you're using Riverside right now is it gives you more value than something else that used to exist for a higher cost. And so we as entrepreneurs, and by using Riverside, it can touch millions of people now, where you might have only touched a small number of people before. And now you have access to everyone because of what you're using. So we're both the creator of the new technology, right, or the new products or anything else. And we're also the user of things that give us value. So the output of what I just described has to mean deflation because we're a part of it. And then from that world, prices would fall and you would increase value forever. And you would keep on increasing value. So if you lived in that world, then it would, and you had $1, but you didn't have a job, that $1 would buy more and more and more and more and more forever, because the natural process of us competing with each other to provide each other more value and us using the more value means the more people doing that, the faster abundance for all of society. Everybody wins. It's a infinite game, because that's what the free market demands. And it doesn't demand any coercion, control, anything else. It just happens out of our own incentives. So then, and what I just described is what I think many people in Gen Z would say, that's crazy. We've never lived in that world. That's, the economies don't work like that. Political systems don't work like that. We live in a system that prices rise forever, and the control system and everything else. And they're right, because if the natural state of the free market is deflation, then we don't have a history book. We don't have an economic model. We don't have a political model that has ever shown it. It means we've always lived in a control system. And so now what I just did is two truths exist at the same time. And it provides a cognitive dissonance in your own brain trying to explore those. If the natural state of the free market is deflation, and you nod your head and you know that's true, but you're operating in a different system, then you're part of the system of control, and nothing from that system can solve that problem. A system problem can't resolve a system problem. Every single thing from that system. In other words, there's no politics, there's no person, there's no anything else from that system that can stop that from happening. Because in a credit-based system, which most people are measuring from, the debt has to exponentially rise, because the money is debt. So when people borrow money for a home and they borrow money from a bank, the money didn't exist. It was lent into existence. So if you lend money into existence and then you allow the free market, what I described, and prices to fall, all of the money disappears and there is no more money. And so what ends up happening, and then people get confused about that. And they say deflation's bad. And they say deflation is bad. And it's true, it's bad for a credit-based system, a debt-based system where money is debt. It's terrible for it. But is deflation bad? Is you getting more value forever bad? That's a different conversation, right? You can't marry the two. And so it's just, so we're involved in a clash. You laid this out perfectly when you open this. We're involved in a phase change of society. A complete phase change. And in physics, a phase change, when water goes to ice, it operates completely differently. And that's what's happening to society today. And we're not just watching it happen, we're part of it happening. And so depending on what side of that you're on, one side will feel worse and worse and worse. And you'll blame more and more people outside of you, because it's a system that's unstable. And from that system, it has to coerce and control you to believe it's somebody else from that system. And from the other system, your life would look better and better and better. So I'll stop there and let you ask another question, because I just went on it for quite a monologue.
No, you mentioned quite a few things in there that I do want to touch on. But to start things off, you brought up, this kind of sentiment that's rising in a lot of people around the world right now, where we're looking for something to blame, and we continue to just be angry about the things that are happening to us as we transition into this new world. So in your book as well, you did write about the rise, in populism and anger and hopelessness. And I do think we're seeing a lot of that in Gen Z itself. We've got a rising metric of financial nihilism, where more and more kids my age are, thinking that we might never be able to own a home or, start a family, buy a car, accomplish the American dream in the sense that it was 50 years ago. Or we have a rise in socialism where people are increasingly anti-government and anti-institution. So what I want to ask you is, do you think we're seeing this as an emotional cost of a system?
Yeah. And that's why I just keep coming back to a first principle. The natural state of the free market is deflation. If you're not living in that world, then you're living in a control system. And the control system benefits by pitting you against somebody else, both sides of it. It's Biden, it's Trump. It benefits from you staying in it, trying to matter inside a system that's stealing your money. And remember, this is exponential. The faster technology moves, or the exponential rate that technology moves, means your prices and your value should be increasing exponentially, even if you didn't work. So now you have to ask, where does money come from? And if money comes from just pressing a button and making up more units of money, then relative to the button pressing and making up more units of money, everything gets more expensive. If everything gets more expensive from the pushing of buttons and essentially devaluing you, then who could fix that? Because at the very top of who's taking the money, the richer you are at the top, the more you're extracting from people. And why you're extracting more is because you have all of the companies. You own Tesla, you own SpaceX, you own a bunch of the companies. And from that, because it's not free market, because money is being manipulated, those companies are, relative to the money, rising in value. And you have all of the value. Let's use it as a house example. Houses, if you measured them in a stable currency or gold, they've actually fallen for the last 50 years. But if you measure them in a piece of paper that's being devalued, it looks like it's rising. So why is a house turned into an investment vehicle rather than a home to raise your family? It's turned into an investment vehicle because you couldn't store your money in money. You had to store it in something else because the system that we built, the debt-based system, required you to store your time in something else because the money was being devalued. So now if that was the case, then anybody who had money would store their assets outside in other things, art, cars, houses, all of these things. And that would be further pressure on anybody underneath that line at an exponential rate, that these things were rising and they were left out because your generation was storing your money in money that was being devalued at that rate. So it would obviously lead to all of the things that you just said, and it leads to actually more government intervention, socialism. It leads to more socialism because there's a whole bunch of people left out of society who want to blame somebody else, and they turn to government, who created the problem of manipulating money, to solve the problem that the government created. And so a really simple question emerges from what I just said. Is there any problem that could be solved? Any problem that, think of the thing you care about most, or any of your viewers care about most. Is there any problem that could be solved long-term by artificially manipulating money to steal from other people? And every problem gets worse.
Yeah, I think with my generation, this is a very nuanced topic because obviously when we look at the problems that are happening in the world, we're unable to connect them back to the fact that they rise from a broken money in the first place. And, you've said multiple times, at least now in this video, that even though technology is exponential, money isn't. And that mismatch tends to be what creates this chaos. So with that, I want to ask you
Can
about...
I just correct one thing? So if technology is exponential on a curve like this, so downward curve to try to give you more value, then the opposite side of that curve, if you're living from a control system, money has to be exponential to stop the productivity from flowing to you. So the increase of money, the increase of debt has to be the exact opposite to that curve, to steal that productivity from you, to allow that system to emerge. Now that opposite benefits anybody at the top of that system. And all of the media that you're looking through, all of the media, all of the technology companies that you're using, the Mag 7 that everybody's trying to trade within, are the beneficiaries of that theft. And so they're looking through the same lens that's causing the problem, that exponential rise in money, for a solution. And they're all trying to be that big company right? They're all trying to compete within that framework. And what ends up happening is then, because they don't know what's happening, like at first principles, you're gambling with a whole bunch of, saw this person get rich, so I'm going to do that too. And you go into, let's say, all of these nonsense coins, right? And a whole bunch of people that you saw get rich, because really what you're trying to do is protect your purchasing power and everything else. You're taking more and more risk because you're seeing this almost breaking of society to chase the next fad.
So is this where we kind of see that K-shaped economy come from, where a lot of us feel that the rich just continue getting richer? And, for everyone who is in my boat, in my age, the idea of financial freedom, of having a secure financial future, just seems more and more out of reach.
So exactly. And so what I say to very wealthy people is, you couldn't build walls high enough to protect you from what's coming if you're extracting it at this rate. There's nothing. The system will break because we'll break it. Now, people don't know the reason. So they people with wealth, they turn against, and they rise up, and they're misinformed on what's creating it. It's actually not the wealth that's it's the manipulation of money that creates that. And then a whole bunch of people, and both sides of those people, believe in their little window that they're righteous, right? In doing it. And they both actually contribute to a system that is stronger over both of them. And both people, like if you talk to very wealthy people today, they're very worried about the rising inequality of the world. You do things to donate money to try to stop the rising inequality, but all the donations within that system contribute to more rising inequality. And there's just no way out of it. So it's not bad people, it's a bad system design. And we're all part of, if we're inside that system, we're all part of that system. So, and it's easy to look at, and it's easy to remove your own agency from the decision and blame somebody else, right? That's the biggest thing. It's so easy because remember, these two systems are different, right? Natural state of the free market is deflation. And we'll go into Bitcoin a little bit more, I'm sure. But if the natural state of the free market is deflation, anything you're doing in the other system is contributing to your pain and everyone else's pain. But you think it's somebody else. It's easy to believe it's somebody else.
Yeah, and this is something that I do like to highlight on this channel, that, the problems that we're seeing in the world, when it's easy to go to protests and it's easy to start screaming, tax the rich or eat the rich. But it really comes down to the fact that we have a broken money system. So I do want to come back to, the economic foundation of the new world and start talking about Bitcoin a little bit, because this is something that people my age really do struggle to understand. But I really do think that Gen Z is probably the most important generation when it comes to trying to understand Bitcoin and work towards that better future. So for you, obviously, Bitcoin is more than just an investment. It's a coordination layer, as you tend to put it. So you've called Bitcoin kind of this truth encoded in energy sort of foundation. So what does that actually mean? When we're headed into a world where everything kind of feels like a lie and everything feels like we've been deceived for years and our future is being completely stolen from us.
Yeah. So again, I've been in technology for a long time, and I've also seen the protocols develop versus technologies. And what happens in technologies are typically winner take most until there's a new technology that creates a new winner take most. And they come around often. Protocols are different. Protocols are winner take all. And they come in layers. And the last protocol for Gen Z, now you weren't alive when this was happening, right? But the same thing happened on the internet. When you think about the internet, probably as Gen Z, you think about the internet in 1989 with Tim Berners-Lee when he created HTTP, or that's what the reference point to the internet, that people opened up the internet. And there was a massive shift in, at that time, that what people realized what was happening and what was going to happen in the world, and everything was going to move onto a different protocol layer. So this Riverside your iPhone, all of these were emergent from a new protocol layer that was the internet. Everything is on top of that. And if you were outside of that internet layer, if you were, let's say, a newspaper business, you went extinct. And tons of companies, it was an extinction event over a 20-year time period for tons of companies that didn't adapt to a new way of delivering value. And it was also an emergence of a whole bunch of new companies on top of that protocol that created value for society on top of that protocol. So Google didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist. The Apple was almost dead, right, before they drove into that protocol layer and created a whole bunch of technology and tools that we would then use that we didn't see we would use until they were there in front of us. And so companies and entrepreneurs raced to it. Other companies tried to stop it, right? Think Blockbuster Video, right? And then Netflix. Think Kodak, who invented the digital camera, and we take more photos, like hundreds of times more photos today for free. And that destroyed Kodak's business of processing film. So they didn't want to see it. They didn't want to create a different model because they tried to protect. Now, this is really important to think through, because if Bitcoin was a protocol, it was a different protocol, then it would create the same confusion today as the internet created for everyone at that time. Now, why I say protocols are winner take all, and I want to do something here too. When people are talking about Bitcoin, they shouldn't be talking about Bitcoin as the internet in 1989. They should be comparing Bitcoin to the first layer of the protocol that became the internet, 1969, which would, and I'm going to simplify things a little bit, but TCP/IP, right, which was the original internet, was developed by DARPA as communications technology in an event of a nuclear holocaust that would stay resilient. And for that to stay resilient, it had to be so narrow, and the first part of it had to be so narrow that it didn't have any other attack vectors. And that's where that is a really good look at what Bitcoin is at its base layer. It's been attacked for 16 years by an economic system, by governments, by China, by misinformation, trying to remove the decentralization and security of this protocol. And every 10 minutes, there's a new block. Perfect communication tied to energy that can't be broken for 16 years. That's the base layer. And then if that was happening at the same time as you had exponential technology, same time you had a broken money system, as everything else, you could expect, if you are measuring that from the other system, you could expect that you would be really confused with what was happening. And you didn't understand how protocols develop in layers. You would be confused to say, all of those people in Bitcoin, they got rich, and there must be another coin that I'm going to get rich in. And so you'd be wide open for all of the nonsense, and you'd be scams and everything else. And that generation who'd grown up in a world that was chaotic and breaking and everything else, they'd be ripe to be preyed upon on all these scams, right? And they'd fall into I'm going to trade this one, I'm going to trade this one, and trade this one. And all of those coins, if this was a protocol, would go to zero against the protocol end time. All money, all of the fiat money would go to zero against the protocol end time, because the protocol was imposing a new discipline across society. It was imposing. So, and it didn't care what you thought. So I'll give you an example. How I view Bitcoin is how I view the free market. All prices should fall forever. When I measure my house in Bitcoin, my house was 300 Bitcoin 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. My house is now 12 Bitcoin. So 300 Bitcoin to 12 Bitcoin in that time frame. My house in 5 years will probably cost less than a Bitcoin. But if you convert Bitcoin to your piece of paper to measure prices, then it'll appear as prices of Bitcoin are going up.
I think this is one of the biggest things that when I have conversations with my friends or my peers about Bitcoin, it always comes back to this, well, we missed the mark. Bitcoin went up and it did its moon, and now it's come down. And, a lot of them will be like, I've invested in Solana instead, or XRP, or
Totally.
they bring up some other coin that I honestly haven't even heard about. And they're like, you should look at this one. This is going to be the next Bitcoin. But I do think that Bitcoin, it runs a lot deeper. In my eyes, it gives us a way to anchor the future when we're looking at a future of instability for a period of, let's say, about 20 years with advancements in technology. With Bitcoin, we do have this protocol that is essentially the most objectively stable that we can get in this, I think, time and age of technology. So what I want to ask with that is, if we have if we have a future where we have Bitcoin obviously as this, truth encoded in energy as this protocol, and we have AI as intelligence encoded in computation, what happens when you merge these two systems? What happens when we have Bitcoin as stability and AI as innovation?
So it's not just AI and innovation, it's energy innovation. It's all of the ideas that it's robotics. It's all of the physical tax, things that'll be done by AI as well, and robotics as those merge. But if you just start at the top and you say, and it's always been this way, we use the tools that make us more efficient, period. And in a free market, prices tend to trend towards the marginal cost of production. And so the reason your calculator app, we used to, probably when you were going to school, early on going into school, is you bought a Texas Instrument calculator. And then the first calculator on the iPhone cost money. The second one cost less money. Third one cost less money. And every time they got better and better and better until they were free. And where does that show up in GDP? It's not there. It's gone because we innovate it. We compete away as a free market. If you created money, if you created value for somebody else, the market swarms to try to create more value like you, and they compete with you to provide more value. And we only use the thing that gives us more value. That's why prices constantly fall, and we get more value out of it from the free market. So if you just take that by extension and you say, what is AI? And AI is lines of code, creating other lines of code. Then how much does a line of code cost? And it's free. And the new model that costs tons to compute and the energy to cost it in the new model costs a bunch of money. But then 2 weeks later, it's free and it's open sourced and it's everywhere. And there's another new model that's better than the last one. And then people pay for it for a little while before they move. But all of this trends to free. And so when I say these don't merge. They're two different concepts. The productivity of a free market has to flow to you. Now, the different concept is if you own part of a protocol that can't be changed, no matter what people try to do, then it's imposing the first free market that ever existed. Imposing. And relative to it, all prices will fall forever. So in other words, if you had a tiny fraction of Bitcoin, then that tiny fraction will appear to you, I'm not saying growth in fiat dollars, it will appear your purchasing power will increase forever as long as Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure. And then the only thing that changes what I just said is if somehow Bitcoin becomes centralized or somehow it becomes insecure. And then you could go through all of what people are doing probably now on your podcast as they're thinking through this and they listen to it again and they're thinking, oh, what about the quantum risk? What about governments trying to stop this and everything else? And what they will come to at the keep on going and exploring this path more is they'll realize that all of those things are them giving their agency away to somebody else. And in Bitcoin, you can run a node, you can contribute to this system, and you can take agency to protect this network.
So I want to transition things now into talking about what the future might look like for Gen Z, because a lot of us are graduating at this time where we have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear for finding jobs in the future. Myself, I'm studying computer science, and a running conversation that I have with my peers is that there aren't going to be many entry-level software engineering jobs left or data scientist jobs left for us to take in 3 or 4 years down the line. So as we enter into this system where we are coming, into the first free market that we've ever seen, and everything is truly about competition, and it truly is about the value that you can provide to the economy, what can Gen Z start doing now, essentially, to prepare? And I don't know if you want to give advice during this time, but I would love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. you are a really good model of what to do, like what you're doing right now. Studying computer science was one of the areas that is expanding, and you're studying being curious about Bitcoin and creating value for other people in Bitcoin because um, because they don't know what's happening. It's confusing, and they haven't done the work. And so those two areas are like really important areas. And I ask a pretty simple question: if 99.9% of the people in the world were trapped in a system that was kind of built for the past and didn't work anymore, and you understood this transition of a different system, and you understood how to help them into self-custody, you understood how to build on top of it, and you put your voice out there to teach and inspire other people, and that would create a tremendous amount of value in the free market, because most people wouldn't know, and you would be helping provide value to a transition that was crazy important to their lives. So in other words, the pain that people feel, the fear that they feel, should be used as an amplification for how to remove the pain. And if you remove it for yourself by going down the rabbit hole, by understanding, okay, I can contribute to a system that my money can't be devalued. I can contribute in that system. Then probably the next step, now first, how do I know? How am I not scammed by some other coin? How do I know that what Jeff and Nicki are saying is true about Bitcoin? It requires a whole bunch of work to make sure that this is in Bitcoin, they say, don't trust, verify. So, but this is open source. You can do all of the work. You can see what I've said 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 3 years ago. And if I was somebody that was constantly changing, you probably would want to discount what I said. And then if that proof of work shows up more and more, and you see it everywhere and it's right, then you might want to lean in. And the same thing is true for everybody you should talk to, right? And then you should lean in and understand it for yourself. If you do that work, I've spent 15,000 hours trying to kill Bitcoin, not trying to kill it, but trying to see where its vulnerabilities were. Because as I was doing that work, if I was going to spend all of my life in it and build on top of it and create a venture capital company to invest in entrepreneurs building on top of it, then I wanted to make sure I wasn't building on quicksand. And so I'm not asking everybody else to spend 15,000 hours, but that 15,000 hours is probably the best thing I ever did, because it gives me a base that I'm not worried about any of the things that other people are. Nothing. And I'm inside a different environment that is expanding. It's beautiful. The hope, the truth, the freedom, what's happening all over the world. And I understand that if I wasn't in this space, I wouldn't see it, because I would be measuring outside of the other system. But every single person on the planet now has this is an open network. It's an open protocol. Every single person has an ability to just move their time and understand and dig deeper and be curious. And from there, you could say, how do I use my genius, whatever I'm the best at, on top of this to create value for other people? It's interesting that many of the stars, Bitcoin has no heroes, right? But many of the stars that people talk about all the time, I was really good friends with them when they just started. And they were the same as you, the same as me, the same as anybody else. All they wanted to go deeper and understand the truth. And then they wanted to help others. And the helping the others, by whatever way they wanted to do that, created what other people now look at them as, wow, these people are important. And we are so crazy early. Like, we're crazy early. If anything, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I learned something new, or I need to investigate that, think about 8 billion people on the planet that don't know this yet. Most Bitcoiners are measuring in a piece of paper. They're measuring price go up. And so if you went deeper and understood what this actually means, and how it is the first truly global free market that ever existed, and we've never lived in that system, then you have a crazy opportunity to create value for other people.
I guess with that, I mean, if you were 20 years old today, I would love to know, starting fresh in the new world, trying to build your career. What are some of the skills that you might focus on?
My son is 19 years old. My daughter's 21, and my other son's 17. And so primarily, I want them to do whatever they feel is the best thing for them. But I did tell them all that learn AI, learn robotics or AI, learn what's happening there, and constantly question yourself too. In social media, people want to be influencers and everything else. And that whole thing is going to just die to AI, and it's going to just be more noise. So you have to have a resiliency to which things you want to learn, and then spend time. And I told them to learn Bitcoin and deeply understand that, because if they learned that, they could apply their talents anywhere, and they could be immune to a whole bunch of what's going to come from the other system. So I would say the same to anybody. And while you're learning, here's a hack, right? So people will, okay, where can I get a job? Because they're so used to going and getting a job instead of inventing their own job. And so if you have a job and you're kind of in the machine, you're trying to keep enough money in this world that's moving away from you harder and harder, then take a box of time, take a little box of time and apply it to curiosity about Bitcoin and learn. And take that time away from spending time on social media. Take a time from Instagram or Facebook or whatever you're on, TikTok, and just take that time window and say, I'm going to learn this thing, and I'm going to hold that time away from that. I'm going to sort of create more time here. I'm going to create value in this. And as you do, you're going to see tons of opportunities. You're going to meet people that are also doing the same thing, and opportunities will emerge from your moving your time into a new system bounded on truth. And that time will expand, and it'll expand your time. It'll expand and that will be infectious. And eventually the job that you were doing over here, you'll replace it with your time over here, and you'll probably make way more money and be happier and more fulfilled. One will take the place of it. So there is so much opportunity, because the world would obviously look like crazy opportunity if most people were stuck in fear.
This sounds a lot like the advice that my parents tend to give me on every dinner table conversation. It's great to hear that, this is something that I think Bitcoiners are so convicted in, where they say that, it really is about where you spend your time. It really is about the opportunity cost of where you choose to put your energy in at this time when you're kind of in your 20s and you're growing up. But I know we're running out of time, so just to wrap things up here, last few questions. What do you hope is, I think the one thing that people might take away, that people my age, someone who is maybe curious about Bitcoin, but isn't quite convinced to put in the proof of work and spend those thousands of hours kind of studying it and learning it. What was something you would say to kind of convince them or hope that they take away from you today?
Yeah. So for me, I'm actually big asking questions, right? Is the natural state of the free market deflation? Because that question imposes a agency on where am I spending my time? What does that look like? Am I spending my time in a system that's stealing from me? Do I believe it's somebody else stealing from me, why I say that specifically, and that's going to hurt some people and it's going to sting, but it is true. We are all the creators of our own reality, and we live in a fabric of all of those banging into each other in the free market. And if you tried to tell somebody that their reality isn't true, they will fight you with everything they have. They will defend their reality. They will stay stuck, even though the evidence around them, they'll think it's somebody else. And you can see this. You can see this in your friends. You can see this in repeating the same pattern, right? And staying stuck and thinking it's somebody else. You can see it in everyone else, but you can very rarely see it in yourself. And so turning the mirror around to understand how you create, if your life is all tens, if it is fantastic, I'm not talking about surface fantastic where you're showing off to try to matter to other people. I mean, really, really deep fantastic everywhere, then don't change. Do exactly what you're doing, because that's all you too. But if it isn't, what I found is one thing for me is where it wasn't a 10. I wanted to, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would this part of my life look like? Everywhere it wasn't a 10, where it was a 10, I wanted to take credit. Where it wasn't a 10, I wanted to assign blame. And when I realized it was all me, if I was taking the credit on one side, it had to be me on the other side too. Only then could I see the things in me that I had to change to create a world that I wanted to see.
I think that's a really beautiful note to wrap things up on. For everyone who is listening to this, I don't think I could have said it any better. But just to add some closing thoughts, every generation does live through change. And, Gen Z obviously is no exception to that rule. But we do have the disadvantage or the advantage, depending on how you look at it, of living through a complete system collapse and the emergence of a new one at almost the exact same time. So obviously, Mr. Booth has come on and he's talked a lot about the first free market that we have ever seen, about, truth and hope and abundance. And whether or not you agree with everything he says, I do think that his message is very simple. And I do think that your future is, in fact, what you make of it. So, you don't need to predict the future. You just need to understand these forces that are shaping it. And you do need to put in the work to kind of learn and grow and, keep building for something that's better and bigger for yourself and choosing where you stand. So, Mr. Booth, thank you so much again for coming on. I really did enjoy this conversation. And I mean, getting to meet you has been just incredible.
Hey, Nikki, I'm so optimistic about your generation because you're going to fix the things that have never been fixed before. So when I watch, in fact, that's why I kind of creating Ego Death and the capital to be able to fund this. When I'm watching the talent emerge, people like you and all of the talent coming into to actually drive and fix this, it's just it's so hopeful because of that. Right? It's amazing, and this is how the world always changes. The people that kind of carried the other model, their brains can't change, right? They're so stuck to the old model that they stay stuck. And a new generation asks a different question, and they build a new reality. So that's what's happening today.
Absolutely. And thank you again for the kind words. It's really nice to see some of the older generation be optimistic towards Gen Z, because I think we do get a lot of kind of kickback on the internet of just being called like lazy or saying we're never doing enough. But the fact of the matter is it's a hard time to grow up in, and a lot of us are really just trying to bear down and figure it out.
Been great, and you are figuring it out. And it's, again, when I watch my portfolio company and just all most of them are Gen Zs creating a new world because they see and they want to actively participate in something to fix what is broken. So it's a wildly exciting time.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. That makes me super optimistic and super hopeful for, just to see all the things that, people my age are going to accomplish. But I don't want to keep you too long because I know you run on a very tight schedule. So thank you again for coming on, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your morning.
You too. Enjoy Bitcoin Mina.
Thank you.